This is a quick little lecture that's covering fetal circulation. This is a little bit complicated, so just follow me as best as you can. What happens here is blood, the mother's blood is highly oxygenated when it goes into the umbilical area, and there the oxygen from the mother's blood is going to basically rub up against the baby's red blood cells, and the oxygen is going to transfer over onto the baby's red blood cells, and then the blood is going to go from down through the umbilical cord into the baby, and it's going to work from there. But here's the passageway. Okay, so it goes from this connection between the mother and the baby down through. You got to remember, this seems awkward. Remember, every vessel, regardless if it's oxygenated or deoxygenated, every vessel that's going towards the heart, we call it a vein. Every blood vessel that's going away from the heart, the other way, we're going to call that an artery. Okay, so towards the heart is a vein, away from the heart is an artery. Okay, so this, starting off here, the blood coming from where it was mixing with the mother's blood, that's going through the umbilical vessels, it's going towards the baby's heart, is it an artery or is it a vein? It's going towards the heart, it's a vein. Okay, so we call it the umbilical vein, even though it's highly oxygenated blood that's mixed with the blood from the mother. Now it goes straight to the liver from here. Okay, so it goes through the belly button, and you just think the liver's right here, pretty close by. It goes straight through this umbilical vein into the liver. When it goes in the liver, it mixes with deoxygenated blood in the ductus venosus. Okay, so there's a little duct in there, and it's a little like a stent, one of those little things don't worry about it too much. I don't go into too much detail, I guess. But anyway, there's three of these sort of it's like little openings: the ductus venosus, ductus arteriosus, and the ductus foramen ovale, and they close up later on. So anyway, so then it goes from the ductus venosus into the inferior vena cava. Okay, so the liver's down here. So now it's coming up in the liver, and it's going to come out and go into the inferior vena cava. So now it's going towards the heart from the liver. And then from the inferior vena cava, it's going to go and dump into the right atrium, just like it does in adults. So this is the thing where it's a little different. There's a hole. There's a hole coming off of the right atrium, and the blood can either go through this, I won't go into too many details, but there's this foramen ovale, okay? So normally we have mechanical view of the heart. We've got the right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. Normally there's no hole here when you're an adult, but in babies, they have a little hole right there, and it's called the foramen ovale. So when the blood dumps in to the right atrium, it can choose to go down into the right ventricle, or it can go through this little hole and just go straight into the left atrium. So it gets to choose. So it goes to the right atrium, it can either go through the foramen ovale, or it can go through the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, we know the blood pushes into the pulmonary circulation, so through the pulmonary artery and into the lungs. But there's another little hole here on the pulmonary artery. It's called the ductus arteriosus. It's a little hole that connects the pulmonary artery with the aorta. And it closes usually after birth because there's a prostaglandin E keeps it open. And when you get really oxygenated blood going through it, it affects the prostaglandins in there, and it clamps down usually. Sometimes if it doesn't clamp down, they call it a patent ductus arteriosus. So it's like an open ductus arteriosus. So anyway, so this little hole in the pulmonary artery from the right ventricle, the blood can either go to the lungs, or it can go through the ductus arteriosus into the aorta. So moving on here, the descending aorta, by the way. So now the blood, we follow this passageway. Let's follow this other one. So the blood going back in time, and the blood's going into the right atrium. Instead of going to the right ventricle, let's say it goes through the little hole between the two atria, and it flows into the left atrium. Well, where can it go from the left atrium? We know that. It goes from the left atrium down to the left ventricle. Where does it go from the left ventricle? It goes through the aorta, and from the aorta, it goes to circulation. So really everything's pretty similar to just the way we understand it normally, but you just need to be aware of these little ducts. Normally, this ductus venosus isn't there or whatever. This is what really connects. I get the umbilical vein isn't there. All these things aren't there. But the blood's got to come into somewhere. Where does it go into? Goes into the liver and through the ductus venosus. Then everything's normal up until we hit the pulmonary artery. I guess right up until we hit the right atrium is the first one. Then we got this foramen ovale. Whoop, go into the left atrium. Or if it goes through the right ventricle like normal, it goes to the pulmonary artery. Oh, little hole there. It can go through the ductus arteriosus and into the aorta. So then it travels from the aorta. The circulation goes back to the umbilical artery, going away from the heart, back to the place where it interacts with the mother's blood, and the whole cycle continues. Kind of drew it out here, but I think honestly you can figure it out because this drawing is actually almost more confusing. If you just draw normal circulation, what it looks like, and then add a little hole between the foramen ovale, between the atria, add a little hole with the ductus venosus and the umbilical vein coming into the liver, and draw a little hole, the ductus arteriosus, going from the pulmonary artery to the aorta, and you'll be good.